Hey, what's going on? You're listening to the Road Trip podcast, and today we have a very special guest. We have David Dellanave on. He's a big name in the industry, and he's got some really cool concepts he's going to share with us today in terms of really taking your deadlift and some of your lifts to elite level. He had his own really interesting journey where he went from a mid 200 deadlift all the way up to over 600 pounds, which is kind of beginning to get freaky. That's that triple bodyweight deadlift, which is crazy. And so he had an interesting experience that we'll flesh out today. But first of all, David, how are you, man? How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing well, man. I'm really excited to be here.
All right, cool. Well, you know what? Do you want to let's start? And for people that don't know you, can you talk a little bit about who you are and how you got started in the fitness space?
Yeah, sure. So I'm someone who got started kind of training late in life. I was not the guy who started like in middle school hitting the weight room and then has just always lifted ever since. I started later in life. I got interested in strength very quickly, and I'm thankful that I kind of feel like I found the right authors and mentors in the very beginning. I started reading Pavel Satsuin's work very early on and learned a ton from him. And then I just got more and more passionate about a few things, really. Old-time strength, like old-time strongman lifting, sort of pure strength training. And then as I got more into it, I got really passionate about training other people and helping other people make those gains in their lives too. I opened a gym about 5 years ago now called the Movement Minneapolis, where I train people across all sorts of populations, generally sort of a general population type of clientele, and we focus a lot on strength training there, and we do use biofeedback in the gym too with every single training session. So we do like a group class, but with the biofeedback, every single person's training is individualized to them, so they're doing the very best thing for them at the time.
Okay, well, so you just brought this whole concept of biofeedback, and so a lot of people, even myself, I've heard of the term before, but can you kind of explain, what it is and how you came about to start utilizing it?
Yeah, sure. So the kind of classic dictionary definition of what biofeedback is it's quantifying a state of the body and then acting upon that information. So the example that I always give to people is if you go out for a run with a heart rate monitor on your wrist and you look at your heart rate and you say, okay, I'm getting a little too high right now, I'm going to back off, I'm going to jog or walk for a little bit to slow down, and then you monitor your heart rate, and when it starts to get down to the lower level of the spectrum you're working in, you start running faster again to get it back up. That's biofeedback. You're using that quantified heart rate to change your training. That's kind of the key principle, is that you quantify it and then you act upon it. If you just look at the heart rate and you're like, oh, that's neat, that's not biofeedback anymore, because that's not a closed loop. You don't have that cycle that's occurring with the change in training. So the way we use it is to, we use it across the board. We use it to change movements, variations, as well as loading and stuff like that. But we use it for strength training rather than like endurance. You can use some very complicated hardware like Tendo units, some people may have heard of, where you quantify the speed of the bar. But there's some downsides to that, so we use a slightly different method that's basically just built into the body to customize the training. The idea is to let the body lead the training and follow the body instead of letting a piece of paper or a training plan lead the body.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So wait, how does that tool work in terms of determining how you're going to go about your training for that?
Okay. Yeah, so let's say that you have in mind to deadlift on a given day. I don't know why you would want to deadlift, but that's what you're going to do. So you decided you're going to deadlift. What you do is you check your range of motion. We use range of motion for the biofeedback testing. And then you perform a deadlift, and then you test your range of motion again. If you got an increase in range of motion from doing that deadlift, you'd continue on with deadlifting. If you didn't, that's when you would not deadlift and you would do something different. So basically you're looking and you're seeing, am I getting a negative or positive response from doing this movement? And if it's negative, why would you do that? You would do something else that you can get a positive response from. And if it's positive, you'd carry on with it. And then it kind of trickles down from there. So you know you're going to deadlift. Okay, well, which deadlift variation are you going to do? Are you going to do a sumo or a conventional or a Jefferson, so on? You'd use biofeedback to choose those. Then from there, you use it to adjust your loads. So you may go into the gym with an idea of how much you're going to lift. Like you might have some idea that you're going to be like towards the upper end. Like let's say maybe you're planning on going in to do heavy singles, but you do a heavy pull and it doesn't test well, you get a negative feedback from it, well, then you might back off and go a little bit lower, and maybe you're going to do triples or sets of 5 or something like that. So you're using that feedback from the body to adjust the training moment to moment.
And so you mentioned how as you're doing a deadlift, you might do like this first warm set of deadlifts, and then you might test your range of motion. And if your range of motion isn't increased, then you go with a different variation or different exercise. And so, how exactly does that work? How does the range of motion dictate whether you're going to get a positive response or a negative response from a lift?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And if the question is how does it work, the answer is we don't really know. But what we do know, it's kind of a black box. You can see what goes into the box, and then you can see what happens or what comes out of it, but you don't exactly know what's happening inside there. So what you do is you look for a change. Everything in the body touches. Everything is connected to everything else. So if you do something and all of a sudden your range of motion gets worse and you have less of a quantity, that's what that range of motion represents. It's a representation in a quantity, if you were to give that range a number, of the quality of the movement. So that quantity and quality are associated. So look at it this way for a second. If you go in the gym and you're deadlifting and you pull a new 1 rep max, you pull the highest quantity of a deadlift you've ever pulled, would we agree that that's a good day to deadlift?
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously, right? It was a high quality day to deadlift. So those two things are connected. So we're using a quantity to determine if the quality is good or bad. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. And how do you test the range of motion?
Typically we use the toe touch because it's very repeatable, it's very reliable, it's easy to see on your actual body, on your shins or on your shoes or on the floor where your range of motion is. So you just slowly bend forward, stopping at the very first sign of tension anywhere in your body, and that's your range of motion. You can use any range of motion. You can use a side arm raise, you can use a front arm raise. Any range of motion that you can quantify, you can use. Some are just easier to see than others, like the side and the front arm raise are a little tough to see. We do have a few people who use grip strength, so they'll use a grip dynamometer like a chiropractor might use to measure the grip strength, but that has some downsides too. Typically look at it this way, you're basically doing a max grip test over and over again, and at some point you just get tired, right? So it doesn't work as well as the range of motion does.
Right. Sorry, you just cut out there, but I think you're saying you're basically doing a max grip test before you're deadlifting, which is not the best idea if you're going for PR.
Yep, exactly. Okay. You get tired of doing a maximum exertion of grip. So the range of motion is a little bit more reliable in that sense across a workout.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so you find that, when you're doing some deadlift, you're doing some build-up sets, and your range of motion is kind of adapting nicely, that's an indicator that you're going to have a better lift that day.
Yep, exactly, that you're doing the right thing that day.
Okay. And does this concept of biofeedback apply to, let's say, upper body or like bench press or chin-ups or?
Yeah, absolutely. It applies to everything, and it works exactly the same way because everything in the body is connected. So you don't have to use a different range of motion test. You can use the toe touch test, for example, even if you're training upper body. It all applies the same. And even further to that point, it doesn't matter if you're, let's say, training for strength or if you're doing physical therapy to rehab an injury. The principle is exactly the same. Does this movement make my body better in this moment right now? And if it doesn't, don't do it. If it does, keep doing that.
And will it change, like, week to week, where one day, you'll get a positive response doing deadlifts, and then, maybe the next week, deadlifts don't have a negative response, and you have to pick a different movement.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly the point, and that's exactly why we do it. Where it was always the same, in theory, you could just test one time, and then you would never have to test again because you know what's good for you and what's not. And to that point, you could just write down a program of things that are good and then always do that. The problem is that's not how the body works. The body's constantly shifting and adapting, and the stressors that are being applied to you are always shifting and adapting. Your body's not in the same state when you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to catch a really early flight, and then you sit on the plane for 2 or 3 hours, and then you sit on the train for another hour, and then you sit in the car for half an hour, as a day when you wake up with 10 hours of sleep and go for a long walk and then go to the gym. Like you're not starting from the same baseline by any means. Maybe you play a sport and it gets you all twisted up. I work with a ton of athletes, and if you think about a sport, like take golf for example, if you're a golfer, you're constantly swinging this club in the exact same direction, twisting your body in the same direction. That applies forces that said specific adaptations to impose demands says that you are going to adapt to those demands, which means your tissue is going to get twisted up, and you're going to need to apply some different forces in the gym to kind of undo that if you've gone too far.
Okay, cool. So I just want to kind of like get an idea of how I would apply this training, this concept to my own training. And so let's say for one workout day, deadlift's my main exercise. Yeah. And so maybe I'm going in to do some sumo deadlifts, and perhaps sumo, like I'm just not getting that positive response. Then when I have like 2 different exercises to kind of rotate through or to switch from, and so like would you keep it towards movements that are similar to deadlifts, or would I fluctuate my training and be like to like a completely different movement?
That's a really good question. So the first thing you would do is you would stay as specific as possible. So let's say sumo deadlift was no good. Well, let's check out conventional or something different but similar, and try Jefferson. Mm-hmm. So you've got conventional, still a very symmetrical deadlift. That doesn't test well. You try Jefferson, which is a bit of a more asymmetrical deadlift, and that still doesn't test well. You could keep going down the road of deadlifts, but at that point I would say, you know what? You probably no deadlift is going to test well today for whatever reason. So that's when you would actually try like an opposition movement, and you would try like let's say a slam, or perhaps even a squat, or something like a hanging leg raise, where it's truly like the opposite movement of a deadlift. Or you could do pieces of the deadlift. Like let's say maybe that's not working well, but you could try a hip thrust or a kettlebell swing just to train that hip extension. That's when you would veer a little bit further away from it. So yeah, that's a really good question.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like, let's say, it's an upper body focused workout, and I'm going in to do, say, bench press. Yeah. And I guess there's probably quite a few indicators from biofeedback if it's going to be a good movement. Like you have like the range of motion test, but sometimes you can just feel that it's not going to go well today.
Yeah, absolutely. That intuitive sense is very, very important, and that's one of the things that the biofeedback kind of helps to train, because maybe you feel that it doesn't feel right, but you don't trust that. If you couple that with the biofeedback and you say, oh, okay, it didn't feel great and it gave me worse range of motion, that makes you trust your intuition more in the future. Mm-hmm. But yeah, if you're an experienced lifter and you've been lifting for a long time, you know when things feel exceptionally good or exceptionally poor. And those are the times to heed that intuition and back off a bit or do something different, or push when it's feeling really good.
Yeah, like just like as a little anecdote, in my own training, I've been building up my pull-ups very nicely, and so I went in a few days ago to do another personal record on pull-ups, and I was doing a couple of my build-up sets, and I just knew, like, gravity felt heavy today. I just like my warm-up sets, like they weren't as explosive as usual, and I just had like this feeling like that, like I wasn't gonna to kind of hit my goal weight, and so
yeah,
I actually ended up switching the variation and doing like a neutral grip pull-up, which is a fresh stimulus, and it felt nice. And so I guess that's in some respects kind of a biofeedback. Would
It
that,
absolutely is. Yep.
so like would that work just simply, going from changing the hand position as little as that?
Oh yeah, I mean it's actually shocking how little of a change can completely change everything. Even changing one hand position to being a little bit more open or whatever, even that can change everything. One of the most common things we do with people with deadlifting and squatting is just stagger their feet ever so slightly, like 1 foot an inch or two forward or back to stagger that stance a bit, completely changes the movement and can make it go from bad to great. So yeah, that's absolutely spot on. And it's interesting I'm sure your neutral grip ended up going really well for you, and
Mhm.
you probably set like a PR for that specific movement.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, I've been teaching this stuff for years, and I've had so many people who I've taught this to come back to me and say, man, you were right. I was testing everything, and I really wanted to do chin-ups, and it wasn't testing well, so I did it anyway, and I tweaked something in my upper back, and it's been killing me for 2 weeks. I have a litany of those kinds of stories where people got that signal and they ignored it because they wanted to heed that program and push through, and then they pay the price.
Yeah, no, yeah, I know what you mean, because sometimes you might have this goal where you want to add maybe 50 pounds to your deadlift, and you have like this strict deadline, and you have to add whatever 5 pounds a week,
Yep.
and one day you might come into the gym and maybe you made great gains for the first month, and and you just know it's not going to go well, but you're so determined and set on getting to that goal and hitting that 50-pound PR by a certain date that you just kind of fight through it at your own detriment.
Yep, exactly. That's when you're not letting your body lead and you're letting the program lead or your ego.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean this makes a ton of sense, and after we get off this call, I'm going to be working out later, and I'm going to start doing this flexibility test. And do you do this for like every for just your main lift for the main lifts for the day, or for every exercise, or
Yeah, I do it for basically everything that I do in my training. It
okay.
just, I mean, it takes a couple of seconds and it makes my training so much better and so much more productive.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. And it's funny, like I have certain lifts which I can do consistently for several weeks, and they go well, they go smooth. And then there's other lifts where it's like I'll do them for 3 weeks, and I'll make like progress, and then the fourth week I'll get weaker.
Yeah.
And then fifth, and it's like, and that's my shoulder press. That's my standing press. I
Okay.
have 3 good workouts of doing it, and then I drop. Then I go down. I regress, and so I find like I have to change the variation. Maybe go to dumbbells or handstand push-ups, and constantly switch it out every couple of weeks. And it's I literally like yeah, it's crazy. So.
Yeah, so that's exactly a signal that you just kind of need to change things up. Or it could be a single signal, and we can talk about this a little bit more later. It might be a signal that you need to change your loading up. Like you might be pushing it too hard and not auto-regulating that volume and intensity.
Okay, cool. And I have a question. Like, do you find like this biofeedback style? Do you find it's more for people that are more intermediate, advanced experience, or is this something that you like to use with like raw lifters with less than a year of training?
Yeah, that's interesting. I teach everyone this at my facility on day one, whether they're an experienced lifter or they've never lifted a weight before, and every single person uses it. So, it really can be something that anyone can use. The funny thing is, I actually have better success with new lifters that have never trained before actually adhering to it and understanding that their body is telling them something versus the advanced lifters who kind of like think they know better. And really like the beginners are more intuitive about it and they're willing to heed that rather than just ignoring it and following the program. So anyone can do it.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the other question I have about this style of training is I find it very fascinating because I see how it applies to me, and something that I've had to kind of do naturally, and sometimes I haven't, and there's you plateau and whatnot. But how often do you usually have to like from your experience? How often do you usually do you change the exercise like almost every week, or can they make do it consistently and then every maybe they run an exercise for a month or two? How often do you kind of get a negative response on a lift?
Yeah, it really varies, and it's impossible to give you like a average because it's just person to person. It really varies so much. There are some people who can do the exact same lift um, every time they training on a nearly daily basis for weeks at a time. I mean, they can just go so far in one direction without having to change anything. And then there's other people who need to change the movement within the actual workout itself. Like they'll do one set in a particular style and then it doesn't test well for them anymore, and then they have to change it a little bit and do something slightly different and then change it again. I mean, that's really how big that spectrum is. There are some associations there where if someone, we've totally muddled the word functional in this industry, because you hear the word functional and you think like Bosu balls and like standing on like bowling pins and stuff like that. But really, when I think of the word functional, I think of the ability to do things and the ability to complete tasks down to the units of doing that in the body. So for example, hip extension is a function. Shoulder extension, pulling the arm back, is a function. So the reason I'm saying all of that is when someone has very limited function in the body, let's say that they're 65 years old, they never trained a day in their life, they've worked 12-hour days for the past 40 years, and their body is just beaten down and not functional, that's the person who typically has to really test a lot of different things to find things that work for them. On the other hand, if you have someone young and pliable and they can do anything and they're super, super functional in that sense, they can pursue one endeavor sort of all the way before they have to change direction. Mm-hmm. So, it really, really varies on the individual how often that stuff changes.
Yeah. I mean, just looking back at my own personal training journey, in the beginning, I was able to do a movement for 3 months, 4 months, and just keep adding weight, and I feel fresh every time I do it. And then as I got stronger, it was different. I'd make maybe I had I'd have a few PR sessions, and then I'd come to the gym and I would just I would just be like, I just feel a lot of stress almost. Yep. Like a lot of pressure. It was a grind to do the same exercise again, and then as soon as I switched it up a bit, I felt fresh again. And so it's almost like clockwork for me. Every time I consistently do a lift, within 3 to 6 workouts, like I'm getting that negative feedback.
And I think that's the body signal, like, hey asshole, you're doing too much of the same thing. Change it up a little bit. Do something different. Go in a different direction for a while.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I think we fleshed out this biofeedback concept very thoroughly. I think people now have a great idea of how to implement this and how exactly it can benefit them. And then we've provided a few different just simple variations in terms of if you're doing sumo deadlifts, you do conventional deadlifts.
Right.
Jefferson deadlift is that like the straddle deadlift?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so you have one hand in front, one hand, and you're kind of facing the bars between your legs. For people that don't know, right. And there's also like the trap bar too. So I mean, there's really cool variations to play around with there. And so let's talk about how exactly you brought your deadlift up to over 600 pounds, which is pretty crazy. It's pretty ridiculous because that's like triple body weight.
A triple body weight benchmark is like it's kind of like the benchmark for elite pulling strength. Like double body weight is really great for like an above average male. Like you hit a double body weight deadlift, that's something to really be proud of. triple body weight is kind of like that next level.
And going from double to triple is crazy, because that's like a 200-pound guy's taking his deadlift from like 400, 600 pounds, which is, that next 200 pounds is a ton. Much
well, the curve is nonlinear, right? So the closer you get to higher, the harder it is. It's exponentially harder to take it from 600 to 700 than it is from 400 to 500.
Well, actually, yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, let's say, like, before we talk about how you got to the 600-pound deadlift, a lot of people listening, they might be at a 250 or 300-pound, or maybe even a 350-pound deadlift.
Sure.
Let's say they want to get to that. Let's say they want to add 50 pounds to their deadlift in a reasonable time. How would you go about adding that 50 pounds for someone that isn't totally experienced? Maybe they haven't been doing that deadlift for that long.
Yeah, so this is a great question. First things first, before you do anything else, invest in at least one session with a competent, qualified, well-respected coach, and make sure that you're dialed in on how you're pulling. Because if you're pulling with the bar 8 inches out in front of your shins, that one little tiny tweak is going to put 50 pounds on your deadlift in the next 2 weeks. Or whatever it may be. If you've got like a major hole in your game, you're going to put 50 pounds on your deadlift in no time, maybe even in one session. Like, it's not unheard of. So first things first, get a coach, invest in it, it'll pay off. Then, if that's already been taken care of, the biggest thing you can do to add pounds to your deadlift quickly is to change up the variations. So if you've always been pulling conventional, you've never changed it up, you've never done anything else, if you'll just change up your variations and get stronger in some other types of deadlifts, it will put pounds on your main variation so quickly. It's one of those things where like let's say you've always been doing conventional and you've never done, let's say, a trap bar. Well, with a trap bar, you're easily able to pull 10 to 20% more than you could with a straight bar. So if you pick up that trap bar for the first time and you can, let's say, only do as much as you do on a conventional bar, you're going to be able to add more to that really quickly. It's one of those things where, like, you might come in 1 week and pull, let's say your deadlift is 250, okay? You want to get it up to 300. And you come in, you try a trap bar, and the best you can do is 250. Well, the next week that you come in, you're probably going to be able to pull 270, 280. The week after that, you're probably going to be able to pull 290, pretty close to 300. I mean, it adds on that quickly, which is going to do two things. Number one, it's going to give you a variation where you're doing more. Number two, you're lifting more weight. There's just absolute poundage. Your body is under more stress, and it's adapting to being able to hold on to more weight. So look at it this way. If you can only do 250 with a conventional bar and you can't do 300, then your body has never been under none of it. Your upper back, your hands, your arms, your shoulders, all that stuff hasn't been under the stress of 300 pounds. But if you now hold on to 300 pounds and stand up with it, your body's been under that stress. You're now able to translate that to your 250-pound conventional deadlift much more easily and much more quickly.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if someone does not have access to a trap bar, I guess they could do the same thing with either maybe a partial deadlift or switch to like a sumo deadlift.
Sure. You could do a sumo. You could do a rack pull or a block pull. You could do a snatch grip deadlift. That's one of my favorite variations for getting stronger because it works the upper back so much. And that will actually effectively lower the bar, making it almost like a deficit deadlift. You could do deficit deadlifts. One thing you might have access to, though, if you don't have a trap bar, is kettlebells or 2 heavy dumbbells. If you have a gym that has dumbbells that go up to 150, you can set those. They're awfully low to the ground, so that's one thing I want people to bear in mind. You can set those on a box or on a block, and now you've got 2 dumbbells that total up to 300 pounds. So there's lots of different ways to do that. If you don't have access to one specific piece of equipment, you can find a way to work around that.
Right. Okay. And for people that might have some low back pain, and so maybe they have issues doing the conventional deadlift, but they're fine on like sumo deadlifts or trap bar deadlifts. I mean, I guess how would you address I mean, have you ever had people that they couldn't do conventional deadlifts, and did you like help work them into being okay on that, or just kind of switch to variations that were more suitable? Because
Yeah,
I
no.
found the sumo deadlift, you have to keep your chest up. You can't really, if it's really heavy, you can't like round your back too much because you won't have any strength on the sumo deadlift.
Yeah, it definitely provides a more vertical torso back position for sure, kind of like the trap bar does too. It's a good question and it's super super common. Um, if you're dealing with any kind of injury, and this really applies to everything, but I do work with a ton of lower back stuff. The biggest thing is, first of all, test everything very religiously. Make sure that everything you're doing is making you better. But the second thing is to just do what you can do. Do the variations that you can. Actually, my wife, Jen Sinkler, who also is very well known in the fitness industry, definitely well more known than I am. When I first met her, she could lift without pain. She had been doing CrossFit for a long time, and she had just, she had done something. And because she was coming from CrossFit, they don't typically do anything other than conventional deadlifts, so she was kind of stuck in that mindset. So what initially tested really well for her was the Jefferson. So she started out with that. She could do Jeffersons that with no pain at all. Then eventually, after doing Jefferson for a while, she was able to do sumo. And now after doing sumo, she's able to do conventional no problem. Actually, as a point of interesting fact, she primarily trains sumo, and her best ever had been, I think it had been something like 305. Up until recently, she just put like 40 pounds on it. But she went to a strongman contest in June and didn't know that you couldn't pull sumo until the day of the contest. So she had to pull conventional. And she pulled 300 pounds conventional on a straight bar for, I believe, and she'd be so mad if I misquoted this, but I believe it was a set of 11.
Shit.
300 for 11, no pain, no issue. So just as an example, she had completely regained that function to be able to do conventional deadlifting without even having done it at all, simply by doing the things that she could do.
Wow. Yeah. No, it's so fascinating how those movements kind of carry over, and it's almost as if like by just doing sumo, like her conventional was going up just as well.
That's exactly what happened. I have a ton of people who come in, start training with me, and maybe they can't do anything close to a conventional barbell deadlift because they've got some back issues and stuff like that. I will start them off with something as simple as really light kettlebells, let's say like two 17-pound kettlebells, one on each side of their body in like a double suitcase or trap bar style, and then I'll take yoga blocks and I'll raise the kettlebells up so that they're only doing maybe something like an 8-inch deadlift. And that's where they start, and eventually every single one of them ends up being able to pull a bar off the ground. It's just a matter of time before that function starts to be regained.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes complete and absolute sense. Yeah, it's just a matter of because I mean people get too stuck on because I know for myself, like you recreate these strong goals in our head, these strong benchmarks. Maybe it's to bench 300, squat 400, deadlift 500, and so it's hard to allow ourselves to say like, look, this deadlift isn't going to happen because it's just not working for me. I got to find a different variation, and in doing that, you actually will get better results. But sometimes it's hard to kind of shift things, and using I guess your wife as an example, Jen, she probably had such a positive feedback when she went to do conventional deadlifts after weeks and weeks of doing sumo deadlifts. So she probably hit very well on that than if she had have done conventional for a month or 2 months leading up to the competition.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in fact, she had been doing sumo for years up until that point. I mean, she basically avoided conventional completely just because sumo always tested better. But the interesting thing is that despite not doing it, she was able to do it. And I think that is really interesting. All too often, I think we let our ego lead. We're like, I want to do this. Well, what you want and what your body wants to do are not always the same thing. And it seems that you get much better results over the long term if you do what your body wants to do instead of trying to force it with the mind.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and even of it in and of itself, that dichotomy is false. Like, there's no such thing as the mind and the body. They're one and the same. They're connected. But you know, if we can permit that sort of false dichotomy, that it's better to let the body lead with biofeedback than it is to decide what you're going to do. You know, with all the biases of the cognitive process.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, I guess. Yeah. I guess. My next question then would be is like, and I mean, what are your favorite assistance movements to support deadlift strength? And
More, yep.
and I know that, and I guess part of that would be grip as well, in addition to, I guess, posterior work. And you have an crazy grip. You did. I just saw your 315 deadlift with one arm, which is just insane grip strength. So I guess we could talk about assistance movements for deadlift and a little bit of grip work.
Yeah, definitely. So assistance work for deadlifts, more deadlifts.
Okay.
Right? No, I mean that is true to an extent, in the sense that, like, I talked about doing variations and stuff like that, like just deadlift more. But if you if you do have a weak point, I believe it's one of two things, and I believe the first one and the most common one is the upper back. I think a lot of people have strong glutes, they have strong lower back, they have strong legs and stuff like that, but they actually don't have a strong enough upper back to keep up with everything else. So some specific upper back work can be really useful. I like safety squat bar upper back extensions a lot for that. The SSB works really well. You can also use chains and bands. Bands are a little hard to get really good loading on that. My friend Brett Contreras wrote a really good article on this for T Nation. I constantly link back to it and refer to it. So if anyone is curious about that, just Google Brett Contreras upper back, and it's just like, it's the best article of upper back exercises that I've found. The second one that I believe is a little bit to a lesser extent, my buddy Brett again would argue on this one, is just the hip extension power, and the most direct, most specific thing you can do for that are hip thrusts. Mm-hmm. So barbell hip thrusts, barbell glute bridges, to really, really hammer the glutes and hammer that hip extension. So yes, as you mentioned, grip is kind of a passion of mine. I sort of reluctantly was dragged into it. I trained for several years with Adam T. Glass, who's known as one of the strongest grip guys in the world, and he sort of infused me with this passion for grip. So now I really enjoy it. It's fun to train. It's fun to have a formidable grip. You know, it can be kind of a cool party trick. So the grip is really important because obviously if you can't hold onto the bar, you can't lift it. So I've got a couple quick tips on that one. The first one, it's a really common mistake that people make with deadlifting, is you should be doing double overhand, so that's palms facing in, on the bar as much as you can. Sometimes people will switch to a mixed grip, one under, one over, too quickly, too soon, when they don't need to, and then they're not training their grip as much as possible. So keep the double overhand as much as you can. Then switch to a mixed grip when you need to, whether that be at a certain weight, like whatever, you know, maybe you can pull double overhand up to 275, but as soon as you get to 285 and above, you need to switch to a mixed. Or throughout the workout, if you start to get fatigued grip, then it's time to switch over. So that's a huge one. Avoid strap work for the most part, unless your grip isn't an issue. If your grip isn't an issue, then great. Use the straps when you need to or when you want to. Or if you don't ever care about your grip strength and you're never going to compete and that doesn't matter to you, then by all means use straps, but otherwise avoid them. And then finally, do some specific grip work, like using some fat grips. Those help a ton. Possibly some torsion spring gripper work, or other stuff like more challenging grip variations for pull-up. Pull-ups are one of the easiest ways to challenge your grip in different ways. There's probably 36 different products on the market, and more if you consider all the different manufacturers of different things that you can hold on to train your grip. Pinch blocks, tubes, globes, all kinds of different things. My buddy Ryan Pitts at Stronger Grip makes a whole bunch of them, really, really great products.
Mm-hmm. Do you have one of those grip crushers?
Oh yeah, we have tons of grippers. Yeah.
I'm just curious I'm curious what type of grip strength you can close in order to, like at like a 315 one-arm deadlift.
That's a good question. My best gripper close is somewhere, I want to say it's in the 125 pounds range, and grippers are kind of weird, and we could do a whole call on grippers, which your audience probably wouldn't be interested in at all. But grippers have their rating from their manufacturer is like what the manufacturer says that it's rated at, and then they have an RGC rating, which is the Redneck Gripper Calibration Rating. That's literally what it's called in the grip community. And funny enough, one of the sort of well-known guys in the grip strength community, his name's Matt Cannon. He actually owns a website called Cannon Powerworks, and he's actually my neighbor. I didn't know this until like a couple years ago. It turns out he lives literally 2 blocks away from me, and he sells grippers and grip strength tools, stuff like that. Anyway, my point is Matt does the RGC calibration. Basically what they do is they take the gripper, and if you imagine this is the gripper with the spring here in the center, and these are the 2 legs, and they put it in a clamp, and then they hang weight from a strap until the gripper legs close. So the weight closes that gripper. That's the RGC rating. And that way it's standardized across the board, because all the manufacturers give you different numbers and they don't actually mean anything. The RGC rating is standardized. So for a point of reference, a Captain of Crush number 3, which is like the standard of grip strength when it comes to crush grip. Like Iron Mind has been in the grip game for basically ever.
I bought like one of those like 7-8 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a trainer in the level 1, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. So you have some familiar.
Yeah.
Oh, what'd you say? I missed that. You're breaking up a little.
Oh no, I said yeah. I just got the trainer in level 1. And even the level 1, I believe was pretty. It was like 190 pounds. It was 190 pounds from what they said. But it was hard to close.
Right. So the interesting thing is that the number 1, I think, rates in at like 105 or something like that. I forget the numbers off the top of my head. But a number 3 is in the 148 pounds range. So just kind of like as a point of reference. And the number 3 is hard enough that most men will never ever close it without very, very specific training. Even a number 2, most men can't close it. The 1 is like a pretty good standard, but is relatively easy as grippers go. So my best is basically a bit higher than a 2. I have closed a 3 once, but it was kind of a fluke, I think. I mean, I've done it once, but not under the certification standards.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Well, I guess we're running out of time here. We've covered through some amazing stuff, and this is gonna be a super productive episode for people that need to make changes to their training. Maybe they stalled out on some lifts, or everything is going up nicely, but there's one lift that's just so stubborn and it won't move. And then I guess literally all they have to do is go into the gym. I guess is this how it would go down? Like, let's say I'm doing some barbell shoulder pressing, and I'm doing about 2 or 3 warm-up sets. If I go do my first warm-up set and like I test my flexibility, then I go do another one, and if like my flexibility isn't improving, then I'm probably not doing the right exercise.
Yeah, exactly. And you would want to make sure to test your starting point to see what your range of motion is before you did them at all.
Okay.
That's the only difference. Yep.
Okay, so I test my flexibility and then go do a couple sets, and then I mean that's so if someone that I guess they can start doing this before they can go to get to the gym, test your flexibility, go and do your lift or do your warm-up sets, and then see how your flexibility adapts, and then if it's not going well, have another variation that you can do.
Yeah.
For every lift, I guess.
Yep.
So or even 2 variations would probably be more ideal then.
Yeah, exactly. Like have a couple little different variations. And as you correctly pointed out, you don't need to change much to completely change it. Like if you're supposed to barbell military press, you don't need to like know a bunch of other exercises. Just grab dumbbells instead of the barbell. You know, just change some element of it. Or, you know, instead of grabbing the barbell overhand, grab it underhand. Just change something, anything about it. Be creative. A lot of times people don't trust their intuition, and they should just do what feels right. I teach workshops all the time, and one of the things I like to do is after I teach people how to test and how to vary things a little bit, I'll say, okay, now I want you with your own you know, gut feeling and intuition to make a tweak, see what it, you know, and test it and see if it's better or worse. And almost invariably, the tweaks that people come up with on their own obviously end up testing well for them because they came up with it themselves.
Hmm. Um, and so you also coach. Do you coach clients online?
Yeah, I do some online coaching on a limited basis, and then I do some photocracy coaching groups as well.
Okay, cool. And so when you're coaching clients online, how does the biofeedback work? Do you set them up with like a couple different variations for each lift, or?
Exactly. When I write a program, I don't write just one movement. I basically write 3 to 4 variations for everything. It's a lot more work for me, but it's the only way that I can do it. Like I can't ethically say, you know, this is what you need to be doing when I believe that they need to test it. So yeah, I write a bunch of variations, and then as a point of fact too, I don't give people percentages or sets and reps that they have to hit. I just give them a general guideline of where they should be, and then I let their biofeedback auto-regulate all of that for them.
Hmm. Okay, so then it depend if they are feeling strong that day and they can go really heavy, then they might go for lower reps, 4 or 5 reps,
Yep, exactly.
and then if they're kind of like getting burnt out on the heavy lifting and they're not feeling the heavy weights, they might do sets of 8, 10. Okay. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep, and that's when they would pursue more overall volume. Yep.
Okay, right. And so for people that want to find you, check out your stuff, what kind of things do you have going on? What's your website, and yeah, what do you have going on there?
Yeah, so definitely my website, dellanave.com, dellanave.com. I've got all my stuff on there. I've got my email list, which I don't send stuff out to often, basically only when I really feel like I have something interesting to say or something useful to say, so I don't spam people with a ton of useless crap. And then I've got my deadlift book, which is deadliftofthefloor.com, and that's a whole biofeedback-based program for increasing your deadlift, as well as kind of like an encyclopedia of the deadlifts. It's basically everything I've ever learned about the deadlift.
All right, awesome. That's Dellanave.com.
Yep.
And we'll put all that information in the show notes on roadtrip.com. Anyways, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute blast. We may have to get you on again. Anyways, guys, thank you
Definitely.
for listening. Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. It's really a pleasure to talk to people.
Yeah, cool. All right, take care.